get this, Atinuke Osibogun-Adeleke. That's how you pronounce it. It's good to be back. I think I was here last year. Seen a lot of, 2 years ago? Oh my God, really? So it's really good to see a lot of old and new faces. I am originally from Nigeria, so I grew up in Nigeria, and I say that because I moved here in my 20s. I'm an interdisciplinary artist. I'm a business owner, and I was a business owner before I went back to grad school to study studio arts. And I teach at Texas Women's University and at UNT. And I'm a mom of 2 boys, and last but not the least, I'm a wife. So that's a little bit about me. Thank you all for being here. The topic of my talk today is art as inquiry, building narrative from research. And I love this quote from H.G. Wells. It says, "It is possible to believe that all the past is but the beginning of a beginning, and that all that is and has been is but the twilight of the dawn. It is possible to believe that all the human mind has ever accomplished is but the dream before the awakening. We cannot see. There is no need for us to see what this world will be like when the day has fully come. We're creatures of the twilight, but it is of our race and lineage that minds will spring, that will reach back to us in our littleness to know us better than we know ourselves, and that will reach forward fearlessly to comprehend this future that defeats our eyes." And I think one of the things that really fascinates me about this is how the author talks about the future and the present. I grew up in Nigeria, but I say that I did not learn about my culture till I moved out of the country. A lot of times when you live somewhere, you take things for granted. You don't realize how much wealth is there until you've moved away, and then you miss so much of it. And so this quote really resonates with me because the author believes that we are children of the twilight, right? We can see a little bit, but we can't see everything. And sometimes we have to pull back to the past to fully understand who we are and who the people before us were to be able to forge forward into the future, right? Okay, so my points of interest as an artist. The Yoruba culture and tradition is very prominent in my work, but the Yoruba culture is not just in Nigeria. Because of slavery, it migrated to a number of other spaces and places, and some of those places actually cherish the culture more than the people in Nigeria. I grew up with a grandmother who was traditional, but I think it was before I turned 10, her religion, Christianity, became more prominent than the traditional religion that she grew up with. And so there was a switch. So we stopped going to see the herbalist. We stopped going to have our annual visits, which, well, as a kid, can be a little traumatic, but I think she was just trying to protect us the way she knew how to protect us. And so you'll see that in my work as I continue the talk. Hybridization of techniques, materials, and symbols, combining traditional artisan techniques and mediums is definitely prominent. I love digital technology. I teach digital technology at TW and at UNT. And of course, being another migrant here is also something as a point of interest, and symbolism and the art of storytelling. So, in the Yoruba culture and tradition, there are various theories about the Yoruba people. And includes Arab, Jewish, there are so many. For the Yoruba, a common language and a common story, mythology, is what kind of connects everyone. So I'm sure you've heard of Oshun, Shango, all prominent in different cultures, but it is something that is the construction of our identity. So it doesn't matter where you are in the world. If you believe or if you affiliate to any of these things, you're considered part of the Yoruba people. But the most favorite explanation is the Oduduwa tradition, which holds that he is the original ancestor of the Yoruba people. However, there is no consensus as to where Oduduwa came from. There is the myth, though, that says that Oduduwa was sent by Olorun. Olorun is God, and he came down from heaven via chain, and it was equipped with 3 items: a cock, a quantity of sand, and a palm kernel. Oduduwa poured the sand over the watery surface, and the cock scratched and spread it until it formed a landmass, and a chameleon was then dispatched to inspect the new ground, and then reported back to God, Olodumare, that the earth was firm and wide enough. This is regarded as the mythological beginning story of the Yoruba people. And for me, when I started to do research, what interested me was the similarities between the origin story of the Yoruba people and Christianity, and the idea of emptiness and God saying, "Let there be light." And, we know the story. And so during that research, I started to work on this piece right here. At the moment, it's untitled. I haven't figured out what the piece is yet. But in that piece, there's a lot of symbolism. Like I said earlier, that is very prominent in my work. And one of the reasons that I love symbols is the ability for us to interpret it in different ways, right? This quotation says, "A symbol, on the other hand, suggests or generates an aspect of life where the number of possible interpretations is infinite and eludes all attempts on the part of the intellect to fix or establish a single meaning. One can never fully account for the manifold meanings that any given symbol has, nor is it possible to categorize them in intellectual terms because there's often an antithesis, an opposite which the conscious mind is unable to grasp simultaneously." And so I'm going to break down the piece a little bit so y'all can fully appreciate it since it's not here. The pieces that you can see right there are leather. And one of the reasons that I picked leather is because of the tradition that the Yoruba people had of marking their bodies. This was done to either talk about lineage, it was a form of identification, I call it a passport. So sometimes they will mark the face, and that was how you knew where the person was from. So my father and my mother are both Yoruba people, but my father's village speaks a different kind of Yoruba. My mother's village speaks a different kind of Yoruba. And so they had markings on their faces and their bodies that told you what particular town they were from. And so that became a point of interest for me. And so leather, because it's very similar to skin, it does react those similar ways as skin does, was my material of choice. The symbols that you can see are related to the story that I read to you earlier. You can see the cock there, and you can see the chameleon. This is the back side of it. So the front side, there is no front side. One side reads the Yoruba mythological story, and the other side reads the Christian mythological story. And it represents who I am. It represents my passage with my grandmother and how she navigated both spaces. Some of it was told to me as a kid. The Yoruba part, not so much. That I had to research and find myself. But the Christian part, I knew from when I was a little kid. So it is, again, this idea that when we leave where we were born, we start to look and search for things that kind of connect us back to the space that we thought we knew, only to find out that, there's a lot that you do not know. And so, again, symbolism is very important. Copper is very prominent in African culture. And I say this, I was at the SNAG conference 2 weeks ago, and there was the Battle of the Rings was there, and most of the pieces were made out of silver. And I picked this copper piece, which I thought was absolutely phenomenal and beautiful. And one of the attendees said, "Oh, why wasn't it done in silver? It would be more beautiful, durable than silver." And I said, actually, in my culture, this is considered more valuable than silver. And so perspective is so important, but copper is a very, very, very prominent material, copper itself and copper alloys. I'm from the Jebu people. That's my dad's town. And they wear rings made out of copper to protect themselves from spiritual, there's a lot that goes on in there, but pretty much like bad things, right? So this was a choice that I made in material to create this piece and include copper in it. Now, the mesh that you can see, I actually hand wove it. And what I did was I would go on Instagram. Felicia would remember this, and Felicia actually put the video of you in here. That's Felicia at the back. So I can't remember, it was Thursday or Friday, I would get online. I'm gonna reduce this so I don't. I would get online and I would have a glass of wine and I would sit, there's Felicia, and I would sit and knit for an hour. And I would have people join me. Sometimes it would be just me by myself. But I would sit and just knit, and we would have conversations. I have tons of videos of different people, including my niece, very little, who just jumped on with her mom, and we had like a little conversation about what is it that I'm doing. But for me, it's tied back to this idea of community that I grew up with in my country. Art, craft wasn't in isolation as such. You created things. I mean, I remember going to the villages with my grandmother, and the artist or craft person could be just outside the door of their house, right? And they're making their thing. Kids are running around, playing. People come and sit and talk to them for a couple of minutes, and they leave. So there is this idea of community and life that's breathed into the piece that they're working on that's not just about the thing. And so that was very important for me to include in this piece. If I can find my thing again. Here we go. Okay, so another part of it that's very prominent is the beading. There are a lot of cultures around the world that consider beads spiritually significant. For us, it's the same thing. Kings, chiefs showed their wealth, their status, by using beads. I equate it to pearls in England, the women with their pearls. For us, it was coral. Coral was a prominent feature in a lot of things, from clothing to accessories to the panel that you can see. And so it was really important for me to include that into this piece as well. The wood that I used is just I found in a dumpster, and that became part of this journey and part of this piece. Each side of it is hand beaded. The color choices are also symbolic. I'm not going to go into that one. But if you look at it, you sort of get an idea of why I chose the colors. I'm hoping people understand why. If you live in America, if you think red and blue states, there's a lot that goes in there. But then red coral is also important in my culture. So again, back to symbolism, back to the idea that we are not able to define as such what we're looking at, because I can look at it from Nigeria and see something, somebody else in America sees something different, and that is very important in the work that I create. The next piece I have has to do with hybridization of techniques. So this piece started off when I read the play, The Exodus of the 16 Sons of Oduduwa. And the story goes that the 16 sons were asked to leave town because the father became blind. And so they were tasked with getting water for the herbalist to heal the father's eyes. And so it was interesting to me, and I started to think about this idea of migration, but not because of economic issues or social whatever. It was because you wanted to help family members. Somebody's sick, somebody's dying, and we're living in those times now where people are being deported because they're not citizens, but they're sick. They're kids with cancer, and all these things happen. And so I started to think about that with respect to the 16 sons. Also think about how they must have been feeling when they were tasked with this thing. However, in reading the book and doing more research, one of the texts that I was reading talked about the fact that the father wasn't actually blind. He wanted the kids to leave where they were, to fully understand and appreciate what the world is, and be able to empathize with other people. So the theory is the kids themselves were the ones that were blind. They were blind to what was happening in the world because they lived in this bubble, they lived in this town, and they were well-to-do. They were the king's sons. So they couldn't really empathize with the people that were under them. And so the father faked his blindness so that the kids will have to go out and search for water. And that water became symbolic of this idea of migration, but also knowledge. Being able to move from one place opens your eyes to see and understand other people. And I think that's so important in the world that we live in today, is people live in such tiny bubbles that we fail to understand others. And so that became the center of this piece here. The piece is made out of wood, metal, embroidery floss, and wood dye. The process that I do for the metal inlay is I carve the wood and then melt pewter and pour that into the wood. Now there's a little bit in between there, but it sort of locks the wood locks into the metal and it's stuck in there forever. And you can see a little bit more of that in this piece right here. Fibers is very prominent, again, in my culture. It's decorated clothing, so we use it to talk about oral traditions, and I wanted to incorporate that into the piece. You can see the decorative embroidery on this agbada here. This is a traditional attire, one that my husband also wore when we were getting married. It's huge. Very hot too. It's always amazing to me how you live in Africa and the clothing is like this thick fabric and you're like, I am dying in here. But it is regal, it's beautiful, and it's hand woven. Apart from the embroidery, the fabric itself is hand woven. So there's a lot of stories that go into that as well. And so I wanted to incorporate that into the piece. The wooden pieces in there are it's a technique that I do that I hand embroider into wood. It was something I researched in grad school, and I really love, again, this idea of hybridization of things, taking something that I've seen all my life and then translating it to a different medium or different material. And I don't know what I have here, but you can kind of see the embroidery, the pewter, and then there's beading also in the crevice there. All of it is symbolic. All of it means something. On the face of it, if you do not know the history, if you don't know the story, you're gonna think, oh, it's pretty, it's beautiful. But it actually does tell you something. It tells you something about my past. It tells you something about my culture. There are 16 pieces in there, as you can see. And each one is different. There's this idea of pulling and moving away from the piece itself. Some of them are embedded into the wood. Some are a little lifted. But really, truly, it feels like it helped me gain a connection with my culture, but it also represents the story that I've gone through moving from my country to America. So it's an ongoing journey. And we come back to copper again. So among the Yoruba people, with regards to sculptural art, we focus a lot on copper alloy. But in my research, I realized there is one particular piece that is currently in Ile-Ife, which is where Yoruba people consider the cradle of Yoruba civilization. And this piece is made out up 99% of copper. For people who work with metal, if you've ever tried to cast copper, it is very difficult. It's one of those things that pits. It doesn't flow really well at its melting point. That's why a lot of times they mix it with tin or other alloys to help it to flow. But this piece is actually made 99% out of copper, and I was so fascinated by that. One, the technical ability that it required to be able to do that is astounding. But two, it was also created for a king. And so this idea, again, of a material that's not considered in other places and spaces, you know, of value, or, you know, it's not gold or silver, but for my people was very important. And the kings considered it something that was worth, you know, putting time, money, and effort into. And so thinking about that, thinking about this particular piece during my research, I started to think about how I could, you know, cast something in copper. I graduated metals and jewelry, same as Felicia. And I knew that I was not going to spend my time trying to figure out how my ancestors did what they did. So I started to think, how can I do this the modern way, the easy way? And so that's my husband on the left right there. He's my guinea pig. He doesn't have a choice. And so I made a mold of his face, a wax mold of his face. And I electroplated that. Now, electroplating is a form that we use in metals. What you're doing is taking another metal piece. It could be, help me here, what could it be? The base. With, yeah, copper. So you can electroplate anything that's conductive, right? What we do is you could take a plastic ball, paint conductive paint over it, and then put it in a bath, a chemical bath. There is the anode, the positive, and the negative. And the electrical current, what's going on in the bath, pulls from the positive, which is a metal plate, and deposits the copper onto the surface of whatever it is that you have in the bath, right? And so that's what I did with this. The wax I coated with copper paint, and then I electroplated. And I was happy with the result. It looked very similar enough to what I'd seen in the books and what I'd seen in the museum online. However, I had a problem with how I was going to mount this thing or display this thing. It was reading like decapitated head, or, you know, head on a stick situation. I did not want to go that route. And so it was back to the drawing board. How do I take this thing that I've researched and this process that I love doing and make it something that I feel like is worthy of the story that I'm trying to tell? And the story, again, is the 16 sons of Oduduwa. And so during grad school, I had researched electroplating on 3D printed objects. But this was wood-infused PLA. And so with wood-infused PLA, what it is, it has wood particles in it, so you can actually sand and treat it just like you would wood. You can stain it, and I'd done a little research on that, and it was successful. There were a couple of failed attempts, and going back to the drawing board time and time again, but eventually I succeeded and started to create pieces, smaller pieces, that were electroplated, but also had that wood element in it. Again, wood is symbolic for my people. We have a lot of wonderful wood sculptors, a lot that are in museums today in the West. But doing the research about them too, it was very interesting to me that they would never just cut down a tree whenever they went into the woods. They would commune with the spirits, and the spirits will tell them what particular tree to cut down, and then they would cut that down. And it was believed that the spirits that lived in the trees were the things that guided their hands to create the sculptures that they created. And if you look at the sculptures, and I should have put one in here, you'll be astounded at the things they could create with the most rudimentary tools. It just seems impossible. And so this idea of spiritual guidance just really stuck with me, and I loved the reverence they gave to wood as a material. And so that's why I choose wood as well in my practice. So these were smaller pieces. In doing my research, I decided to go the digital route because why not? Because that's what I teach. And so what I started to do was I would 3D scan my husband, I 3D scanned my kids, and started to play with that imagery in 3D. And after printing it, decided to electroplate that. So I started off with a smaller piece that you can see on the left, and then a larger piece on the right. And that piece is this one right here. So you can actually take a closer look at it. At the moment, I am working on sculpture number 3. There are 16 of them. It does take a long time for each one to come to life. It would be easier to just cast it in bronze. But this idea, based on research of copper being the major element of the sculpture that is in Ilefe, has really stuck with me. And I want to celebrate the artist, even though he or she is unnamed, that was able to achieve this amazing thing. I want to do that with my work. I want to talk about it forever, if possible, because it still blows my mind. And hopefully someday when I'm older, maybe I'll have time to sit down and actually figure out how he or she did it. But that's me in a nutshell. That's my story. That's my journey with research, with art itself. And just these stories that I'm trying to tell that are helping me connect back to my culture, my space, the space that I'm very far away from, but that I want to know more about. Yeah, that's it. And so I end with this quote. It sometimes happens that there is a convergence between past and present moments, and as they come together, one experiences something of that stillness in the hollow of a wave about to break. Originating in the past, but pertaining at bottom to something more than the past. Such moments belong as much to the present as to the past, and what they generate is of the utmost importance. And that's from one of my favorite artists, Anselm Kiefer. But I really do believe that our past, as you've heard the sayings, right? For us to go forward, we need to fully understand where we're coming from. And for me, I'm doing just that. I'm trying to learn as much as I can about a culture, things that I wasn't shown or told when I was a kid, but now I have the ability to self-learn. And I'm putting that in my work in the hopes that those who are coming behind me, including my children, can look at it, understand their lineage and where they came from. Thank you. Yes. I don't know if anyone has any questions. Yes.
First of all, thank you so much for all of this. It's really eye-opening. My question is, how do you reconcile, I found you coming back to the thread of reclaiming things that are yours, but also adapting things that are not originally or indigenously your culture. And you spoke about, obviously, like the Yoruba people in Cuba and Brazil and so on and so forth. How do you reconcile the opposing forces of adapting something that is not indigenously yours versus feeling like you're selling out, essentially? And I'm saying this from the standpoint of, as a fellow Nigerian African, there's things we have that are ours originally, religion, culture, language, music, food in some cases, and in certain cases we've made that ours by adapting it to suit our context. But how do we, how do we balance that out with abandoning some of the things that are indigenously ours to begin with? How do you reconcile those tensions, I guess?
I'll start off by saying it's a lot, and I can only speak about it from a personal perspective and where I have found peace. Sorry, I don't know if that's bugging the, but one of the things I told myself when I started this journey is I can't tell it all. It's not my job to tell all the stories. We're a community for a reason, right? Because you're from Nigeria as well. And if we all do the things that we were brought to this world to do, then it becomes a complete picture. So the Yoruba people believe in what we call ashe. I don't know if you know what that is. Yeah? Okay. So ashe, for those who don't know, is when you're born, you are imbued with something, a spirit, that directs how your life is going to go. And there's a lot of mythological stories about that too, because you get to pick your head, but the problem with that is all the heads look the same, so you really don't know what you're getting. But honestly, we are all brought to this world to do something. And if we all do the things that we're supposed to do, then it's a lot easier to keep telling the stories. Now, where I've come to peace with the thing is, I'm not the Nigerian that I was when I lived in my country. Even if I go back today, I'm still not that person when I left. And so that story must be told. It is important for us to understand that culture is not static. As you said, things have moved and shifted and will continue to move and shift. Our goal is to tell the stories, just like the quote said, we're children of twilight, right? We tell the stories that we know. We pull from the past and we continue towards the future. The next generation does the same thing, pulls from the past, and the story continues. That is our job. For us to keep everything status quo and just as is a disservice to those who like the changes and the things that are currently happening in the present. So that's where I found peace. I'm okay with adapting what I know. I'm okay with incorporating the things that I've learned. And I'm okay still with pulling from the past and telling the stories that I want to tell. And I think that's given me peace. Does that answer your question? Okay.
At the beginning, you said your parents, they're both Europe, but they're from two different tribes or villages. Are there culture how they were raised up different? Because I noticed when you were beginning your journey, like you're pulling from your dad's culture, and I'm wondering if they are different, why not your mother's culture as opposed to your father's side?
So unfortunately, yes, they are different. So let me answer the question. They are different in certain respects. So based on my research, I learned that I speak Yoruba, but not the language that my ancestors spoke. So when they were colonized, the British had to find a way to unify the people that they were seeing. And so they had to come up with a common language. So based on religion, they taught, the priest or whoever, a common Yoruba language. But it really isn't a language that was of the people. It was a language of the colonizer. So I literally speak Yoruba. That is not the Yoruba of the people. And based on our patriarchal society, I was exposed more to my dad's side of the family than my mother's side of the family. I grew up with my father's mother most of the time. And so a lot of my interactions with culture was from her side. And this is deliberate. Like my mom only took us to her mother maybe twice or three times a year. And it's because the children are considered the father's child. So if you get divorced, they tell you you have to leave the way you came, which means you leave without your kids because you gave birth to the kids in your husband's house. So there is this ownership of children on the patriarchal side. And so that's where most of the stories that I grew up come from. The difference between the Ijebu, so my father is Ijebu, my mother is Ijesha, but my mother's mother is Ijebu. Her husband is Ijesha. So even if I had gone to my mother's mother, it would still be Ijebu that I would be exposed to. Now, I forgot to say this. My mother's father died when she was 13, so she was raised by her mother. So even if I was exposed to that side of the family, it's still the same lineage, it's still the same culture because my grandfather on that side had passed when my mom was much younger. But yeah, so that's why I kind of focus on that side. Thank you.
If you haven't been here before and you want to be shown around, I'd be happy to do so. I can go in there, but I do want to invite y'all to our farewell exhibition for the cohort, the reception is on July 11th. I have some cards I'll put out over here. I'll also put out our 3-month calendar, but thank you again. So glad to have you here.
And thank you for having me. Thank you. And if you guys want to come take a look at this a little closer, please do. And you can see the backside. I do. I've turned down UNT a couple of times for 2W. I'm like, I don't